A summer girl goes swimming. She tires, fishing boat comes along.
Alex!
This is not a boat accident.
It was a shark.
Beach is closed. No swimming.
You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
A shark is attracted to the exact kind of splashing that occurs whenever human beings go in swimming.
Michael, out of the water now!
My boy is dead now.
You open the beaches on the 4th of July, it's like ringing the dinner bell.
This shark, swallow you whole. It's not gonna be pleasant.
You got any better suggestions?
How was your day?
Swell.
I had been thinking for years about a story about a shark that attacks people and what would happen if it came in and wouldn't go away, and I hadn't done anything with it really. And then in 1964 I read a story about a shark fisherman off Long Island who caught a 4,550-pound great white shark off the beaches of Long Island, and I thought, wow, what would happen if one of these things came in and wouldn't go away? And again, I didn't do anything about it until 1970 or 71 when a publisher finally said, that's an interesting story, I'll pay you a couple of dollars if you'll put it on paper. So that's how the idea began. One of the many accidents that happened with Jaws was the title. We had no idea of the title. I had thought for months about titles. I probably had 100. There were some of them were pretentious, A Stillness in the Water, A Silence in the Deep. There were the Jaws of Death and the Jaws of Leviathan, and they all sounded dramatic or melodramatic or weird or pretentious. And we came up to 20 minutes before production, and my editor and I were having lunch at a restaurant, and I said to him, we cannot agree on a word that we like, let alone a title that we like. In fact, the only word that we even think means anything, that says anything, is Jaws. Call the book Jaws. It may work. He said, okay, we'll call the thing Jaws.
Both Dick Zanuck and I saw or heard about the book at identical times. I heard about it from a small card in the fiction department of Cosmopolitan, edited by my wife, Helen Gurley Brown, which gave a brief description of the plot of this novel by Peter Benchley, and then said, might make a good movie.
We both read it overnight, got on the phone with each other the next morning, and said, look, we don't know how we can possibly do it, but we decided we must have this. Whatever it takes, this is the most exciting thing we've ever read, and we'll figure out later how we can make it.
Had we read it twice, in my opinion, we never would have made Jaws, because anybody with a modicum of production knowledge would know there was no way to get a shark to leap on the stern of a small boat and swallow a man. How are we going to do this? Were we going to do it in animation? Who was going to do this?
Coincidentally, the producers of Jaws had just been my producers on my first feature, Strickland Express, Dick Zanuck and David Brown. I asked them if this was something I could direct next. I just remember seeing a very large, a block of pages that said Jaws on it, and I didn't know what that meant. Was it Jaws? Was it like about a dentist? It was kind of an unusual word, and I remember borrowing a copy to read over the weekend. I had no idea this was about to become one of the best-selling books in the nation, and I read it, and I suddenly said to myself, wow, this is just like a movie I just made about a truck and a hapless driver called Duel. And of course, I'm young and I'm stupid and I'm saying, Duel has 4 letters and Jaws has 4 letters. And they're both about these leviathans preying upon every man. And I said to myself, this is kind of the sequel to Duel, only it's on the water. Peter Benchley did a very good adaptation of his own novel. And then Peter kind of turned it over to me and said, here it is, and do with it what you want. And at that point, I didn't quite know what to do with it because it wasn't the movie I wanted to make next. And I remember sitting down and writing the script myself and doing an entire draft myself from beginning to end. It was more of an exercise for me to become familiar with what I wanted Jaws to become. And it was an exercise that was very beneficial because I suddenly had a vision of the film, even though I didn't possess the skills to write it. And David Brown suggested, and Dick Zanuck both suggested, that I go to Howard Sackler, who had written The Great White Hope.
Howard Sackler specifically asked not to have credit. He only had a limited time to give to the film, and therefore he said, I don't want credit.
Sackler really broke the back of the movie and got me to say, yes, I'll make this movie next. I'm committing.
And then came something that's not been recorded in the history of Jaws. The Screen Actors Guild contract was about to expire at the end of June of that year. It could have been 1973, perhaps, whenever the year was. And the studio decreed that no movie would be started that could not be finished by June 30th of that year, because they didn't want to be struck. That is, that photography was completed. And Steven said, I don't have a script yet. You're asking me to start this movie in April, whenever it was. I don't know, maybe this was February. He said, I don't have a script. And I said, who can we get? He said, there's a man named Carl Gottlieb. I'm thinking about him in the movie.
I was hired first as an actor because if I was going to be on the set, I could at least help in the improvisations and the crowd scenes and finding stuff to do in the moment. That's how I was first on the picture as an actor, and then shortly after I was...
Harry Taylor were engaged in order to shoot real shark footage off of Australia, which they were well experienced in doing.
Universal Pictures contacted Valerie and I said, yes, I think we can do the underwater shooting of live sharks in South Australia. So they flew me to America, and I spoke with Steven Spielberg and met the production team over there and explained what I thought we could do with the real live great white sharks. But I explained that our sharks were only about 14 feet long, whereas Jaws was about 26 feet long.
I had this idea of doing a miniature cage and putting a little person into a miniature cage that would have effectively scaled the shark up and added another, 9 feet to the overall length of the shark.
And Hollywood sent us this little man, and he couldn't dive. He had spent most of his life riding horses, doubling for children in films like National Velvet. He'd double for Elizabeth Taylor. And we had to take him out and stuff him into a cage and dangle him into the cold Southern Ocean and have sharks, big, huge, monstrous sharks swimming around him. And he was very much afraid, and we had a lot of difficulty getting him into the cage, which is probably quite understandable. We did have 2 little dummies because we were supposed to have somebody in the cage when the shark broke it up. We had Carl, and he was much better. He looked better in the cage. He moved around a bit. We'd been working for about a week, and we still hadn't got the shots of the shark attacking the cage. I mean, they don't normally do that. They'd rather attack a bait. One of them came in, and he was a big, strong shark, and he swam around, and we had the small cage, the half-size cage, hanging on a bridle attached to a winch on the deck of the Skippy, and he swam over it and got his nose caught in the bridle, tried to swim forward and became trapped. And when a white shark is trapped, it goes crazy. And Ron was filming underwater, and actually that's how we got that footage, and they used it. They wanted someone in the cage at the time, but there was nobody in the cage, so they changed the script to suit that particular sequence because it was...
Scheider was interesting, a story of how I cast him, because here's a situation where I was going after other actors, and I was having trouble finding a name that I liked and who would do it. And I remember I was at a party one night.
And my agent brought me over to be introduced to him. And he was having a conversation with a writer named Tracy Keenan Wynn. And as I approached him, I heard a conversation that went something like this: we're going to have this giant shark come out of the water and land on a boat and crack the boat in half. And then I was introduced to him, and he said hello. He was very polite, very nice, very pleasant. And then as I was walking away, they picked up this conversation again. And I remember saying to my agent as we walked away, I said, those guys, they gotta be kidding. They gotta be kidding. A giant shark that cracks a boat in half? I thought they were loony.
I told him the entire story. At the end of the story, he said, wow, that's a great story. What about me? I looked at Roy and I said, yeah, you know, you'd be a great Chief Brody, because I had loved Roy from The French Connection. And that's how that came about.
What are you doing out there? These are your people. Go and talk to them.
Those aren't my people.
One of the geniuses of David Brown was to realize that he could play upon the egos of writers and actors and other people who are not in the movie business necessarily by convincing us that only by our appearing in the film could the film achieve its true greatness. So he came to me and said, would I consider possibly as a favor to him being in this movie? So I said, sure. I mean, this was pure ego. Why not be in a feature film?
I want to try that end again. Okay? All right. And there you have it. Two different opinions by two men of goodwill. But here in Amity, it seems it's the public that's making up its mind. On Amity Island, this is Alan Craig. All right, Murray, that'll do it.
Save it.
When it came down to where we would shoot this film, we sent Joe Alves, our production designer, out with a team to give us some ideas and some photographs and pictures of where this town should be shot. And one of the places was the island of Martha's Vineyard, which, believe it or not, had never been photographed by a feature film before. They had very strict rules and regulations there.
Martha's Vineyard didn't particularly care for a movie invasion. They didn't like to see an artificial shark parked in a channel where their homes faced it.
The real attraction of Martha's Vineyard you couldn't see with the naked eye. It was the fact it was the only place on the East Coast where I could go 12 miles out to sea and still have a sandy bottom only.
I wasn't having any luck. Everyone was telling me it can't be done, you know, it would take 3 years in development. And I heard about this guy that had been retired for some time who did the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And his name was Bob Matty. And so when I met Bob, I didn't get the usual pessimistic attitude that you can't do this, you know, you can't make this full, you know, size shark and you shoot in the real ocean. And instead I got this very enthusiastic, yes, we could do anything. We assembled this team, and they started on the frame of the shark. So we were working sort of like from the outside in and the inside out. We were separately modeling the shark, and at the same time they were making the skeleton, and we hoped that they would all fit together.
Well, we had a number of different shark components. We had the full shark, which I call the great white turd, which kind of, we pulled along in the water, and it was often on this huge gantry, like a crane arm. When the crane arm was tucked all the way at the 30-foot bottom, you couldn't see the shark. As quickly as they could blow the ballast and force the arm out of the water, the shark would rise out of the water. The shark could be gimbaled separately on the arm to have an attitude change at the top of the... We had just a fin that was pulled through the water. We had a left to right shark and a right to left shark. And the left to right shark, of course, had no left side. It was all scooped out, and vice versa for the other shark.
We built the shark and tested the shark dry. And it worked fine dry, and so we said, ship it back, to New England, and we'll do the water testing there. That's where we ran into the problems.
The ocean was so brutal on the mechanics. all the pneumatic tubes, all of that special equipment was being dashed and brutalized by the ocean every day.
That's a much maligned shark, and I'm kind of responsible for creating a lot of the bad mouthing about the shark, because the shark was frustrating. It didn't really work all the time. It didn't work hardly at all.
I remember in particular being on our barge watching the first shark test, at which time the shark simply sank to the bottom of Nantucket Sound, and we felt that our careers in motion pictures had gone with it. Frogmen were delegated to recover it and bring it back to the surface. Everything that could go wrong with a shark went wrong.
Wherever you were on the island, you could hear the radio mics. And they were always saying, the shark is not working. The shark is not working. Repeat, the shark is not working. No matter where you were, and for months.
We just waited around. We just waited and waited and waited.
And I remember every day, about the 50th or 60th day of shooting, the crew would come over to me and they'd all ask me during the day, when are we going to be done with this movie? And I would honestly say to them, with complete sympathy for the question, I don't know. I don't know when we're going to finish this movie. We could finish it if I get fired and dragged off the movie, then somebody else could come in and finish it quickly. Maybe they'll shut us down.
Dick and I, battle-scarred veterans of the movie wars, knew that you never take the film out of the camera because they may never let you put it back in, particularly with a movie like this. Even if we got 1/16th of a page of script a day, you kept moving.
The planking out from the hull of the Orca, and of course the water rushed in.
And we started to sink. Water started rushing onto the boat. Freddie Zendar jumps up from the hold, cursing and screaming in Austrian, and starts to power the boat as fast as he could toward the beach of Chappaquiddick Island, hoping to be able to ground the boat before it sinks and we have no Orca. In the meantime, we're in 6-foot swells, and Steven Spielberg is trying to send safety boats to get us transferred off the boat. Get the actors off the boat! Get the actors off the boat!
I remember John Carter, who won an Academy Award, by the way, for Best Sound for Jaws. He picked up the Niagara. He was on the boat and held it over his head and said, "Fuck the actors, save the sound department." And I had this image to this day of John sinking, holding the Niagara over his head, the water up to John's ankles, up to his knees, boat scrambling to pull everybody off the sinking Orca, and John with his Niagara going under.
There was a certain level of executive indifference to the sound department's lifespan. Get the actors off the boat! It was funny. We lived.
We had lost the camera. The camera was on the boat too. It went underwater. And Bill Butler said, you know, the developing solution we use is a saline solution, and I think this film's going to be okay if we can rush it to the lab.
We got on an airplane with a bucket of water and the film in it and took it to New York and developed it and didn't lose a foot.
Bill Butler created equipment just to make Jaws. He created a camera platform that, according to the tides or where you wanted to be with your lens, could go either just below the surface of the water or way above the surface of the water. He reconfigured the water box so it was easy to get the focus, your hand in there so you could, pull focus and still have the water lapping the lens. I really wanted this movie to be just at water level, the way we are when we're trying.
Made an incredible contribution with the editing of the picture.
Verna Fields was much more than an editor. She was a friend, a mentor of Steven Spielberg's, and she and Steven worked incredibly close.
Am I in trouble, Jaws? In Jaws trouble?
Verna was great. We used to call her, our affectionate nickname for Verna Fields was Mother Cutter, because she was like our mom, and she cooked for us, and she told us great stories of Peter Bogdanovich and all the films that she cut with him, and she was just a great person. She was a very charismatic person. She was the most charismatic person on Jaws, her and Robert Shaw, except she never came out to sea. She was always in her cutting room. And it was frustrating for Verna for two reasons. One, she never had enough film to cut, because I was only getting, on a good day I get 5 shots, on a good day at sea, 5 shots. On an average day about 3, on a bad day, none. So Verna didn't have a lot of film racing into her cutting room to put together, so she had to be on the island with us for 7 months with very little to cut. Verna didn't have the film until we finished the movie. That's when Verna's work got started, and Verna and I worked every day on the picture at her house in her little cutting room by the pool. And she did a great job. What am I looking for?
Well, we're looking for a nice place to show that Quint refuses to slow down the boat.
Really can't take that much pressure.
That's the spot, Steve.
Some kind of driving thing in the bottom of the orchestra might indicate this, the mindless attack of the shark. It's all instinct. There's no real intelligence behind it. It's an unstoppable boom, 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 boom. This thing comes at you, and whatever you can't fight it off without destroying it.
When he finally played the music for me on the piano, he previewed the main Jaws theme. I expected to hear something kind of weird and melodic, you know, and kind of tonal but eerie and of another world, almost a bit like outer space, inside, you know, inner space, under the water. And what he played me instead with two fingers on the lower keys was dun, 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 dun. And at first I began to laugh. I thought he had a great sense of humor. I thought he was putting me on. And he said, no, that's the theme to Jaws. And I said, play it again. He played it again, and he played it again, and it suddenly seemed right. But when I first heard it, it seemed wrong, because it just seemed too simple. And so simple. Often the best ideas are the simplest ones. And John found a signature for the entire movie.
One could alter the speed of this ostinato. It could be note, 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 note. Beauties of the film medium that it's the combination of the visual and the situation, this being the shark or the knifing scene in Hitchcock's Psycho, combined with the notes. That combination of sound and image forming a memory.
I think the score was clearly responsible for half the success of that movie.
The first test of Jaws took place in Dallas in a shopping center. Dick Zanuck and I were extremely nervous. Would the shark get laughs? Everybody knew, read a newspaper, that it was not a real shark. And so we went and had a very stiff drink. We went into the theater, and the screams started, and they never stopped. And we were pinching each other. It was incredible.
There was such excitement in the theater. I remember elbowing Mr. Brown, sitting next to me, and he was elbowing me back, and he said, "We're in, we did it." We knew with that first scream that it had worked.
And it was amazing. And it made me greedy. I got so greedy. Because earlier in the movie, when they find Ben Gardner's head in the boat.
Final version, when it played at the Rivoli Theater in Manhattan, which was a huge theater, watching the audience react to it was wonderfully exciting. I mean, they just laughed and they screamed, and they did everything that we hoped they would do.
The movie ends, we're swimming away, it says the end, and they went crackers. Everyone went berserk. And then they sat, and they watched all of the credits. Every last one of them, and nobody moved. And then they applauded again. And I've never seen that.
And I remember walking out on the sidewalk at the end of it, and I looked at Dreyfuss, and he looked at me, and he ran over, and he jumped up in my arms, and he said, "We're sensational. We're great. We're terrific." And I said, yeah.
At the end of that evening, I walked out and I ran into Dreyfuss in the street, and we went to a bar, and all Rick could say was, "He did it, he did it, he did it." And I said, "Who did it? What are you talking about?" He said, "Spielberg did it, he did it."
It was a hell of a moment. I felt so proud that I was in that movie, and so proud for Spielberg. He was very pleased.
Jaws went on to become the biggest picture of all times at that time, surpassing the $100 million mark, which had never been done before.
Every time I fall asleep, I dreamt I was on the third or fourth day of shooting. I wake up with an electrical explosion in my brain. My heart beating, can't catch my breath, looking around the room, where am I, disoriented. I calm down, get a glass of water, go back to sleep again. Same dream. I'm on the 4th day of shooting. And I know I've got another 100, you know, and 46 days left. And I wake up again, same thing. And this thing was just, you know, haunting me all night long until I didn't get any sleep. So, you know, Jaws was a fun movie to watch, not a fun movie to make, under the worst of conditions, and sometimes very sweet conditions, but most of the time under the worst conditions.